Welcome to Behind the Scenes. This is how I set up my podcast. Stick with me as I take you through some of the equipment, the tricks, the tips, and how I set up my office to record my podcast. Let's start with the microphone. I use the Rode USB microphone. I use just a basic USB connection, connect that up. Works well for recording audio, and it's very easy to configure and set up, and most applications will see it, and it's easy to configure. On my podcast, I also record video, so it's important that I use some good lighting. I have my aperture big light up over here on the right, and then I will turn on my hair light here to get a better backlight. As far as the placement goes, you want to have this microphone fairly close. It does have a wide pickup pattern, but no matter what, make sure that once you connect it up to your app, once we get into the app that we're using to record this video podcast, riverside.fm, we want to make sure we check the levels and adjust the gain here on the side. And we'll talk about some other settings when we get over there. All right, so we've got our microphone here set up. We got our light set up to get some good video. Right now I'm recording on my DSLR, my EOS R. However, I will record this vidcast using my webcam, which is just an HD webcam that I use to record myself. Will just be for the video. That works really well, really solid, and allows us to capture some decent video for uploading to YouTube. So we'll upload the video to YouTube and the podcast to our hosting site for our podcast, which is Buzzsprout. In my current office setup, I am using a standing desk from IKEA. In order to do the podcast, I like to lower this down and do it sitting down so I'm not bobbing around. It limits the noise, and it also is a little less distracting as far as the video goes. All right, so now we've got the desk lowered. We adjusted some of the lighting. We adjusted the camera position here. And now we're gonna get into how it is that we record the podcast, what application we use, some of the settings. So let's get into the computer. All right, so the application that I use now is called riverside.fm. In the past, I've used Zoom and I've used Teams and I've used other things. It's very difficult sometimes to use those free applications to record audio and video securely over remote connections and people on Wi-Fi in different areas. So when I'm doing a remote vidcast recording, I want the quality to be good. So I will use this application. I've used it a few times and it works really, really well. So let me get it set up and show you a little bit about the settings that I use to configure the podcast and video recording within riverside.fm. So one thing to keep in mind when using riverside.fm, you're gonna create like a studio and configure the settings within that studio. One of the first things that they're gonna ask you is, are you using headphones? I strongly recommend using headphones when you're doing the remote podcast. It cuts out a lot of the distortion and the feedback that comes through, and you get a much cleaner recording. So it'll ask you that question from the get-go. Make sure that you have your headphones in place. So let's get those on. I'm gonna plug my headphones directly into my Rode USB mic. It has a great setting here. And then I'm going to let them know that I'm using the headphones. I'm going to be using my HD Pro webcam, the C920 from Logitech. And for the microphone, I'm going to select my Rode NT USB. And there we go. So now I've configured everything so that I have the correct camera, I've got the correct microphone, and I've selected the monitoring being on my headphones. And I'll go ahead and join the studio. So now here you can see one of the things to keep in mind when you're using riverside.fm is that it does definitely crop to the middle. So make sure you're centered in your camera to make sure that when you get your feedback that you're not off to one side or the other. It has this handy dandy link. You can send this, email it, or you can invite directly from the app itself, which is great. I'm just gonna adjust this camera a little bit, get a little bit of headroom. And I'm gonna definitely make sure that I check some settings in here, making sure that the audio and video, again, have the right input selected as far as the camera and the microphone. And then I want to do the volume output and just double check. So I can see my gain levels here are going up to about midway. I can adjust on my microphone here so that I can make sure that I'm getting enough audio here to test 1, 2, 3, test 1, 2, 3, and making sure that I'm there. Test 1, 2, 3, test 1, 2, 3, testing 1, 2, 3. So I might raise up my desk here a little bit, make sure that I've got the microphone here right in front of me, and getting a good reading here on my output volumes. Got my recording. I'm going to make sure that I'm setting the advanced quality recording to up to 1080p. This allows me to get a better quality stream from the video. Again, another reason why to use riverside.fm is you can configure the settings as opposed to just getting kind of a low quality, maybe a 720p. I'm getting 1080 or up to 4K. In this situation, I'm not going to use 4K because I don't want to sap the bandwidth, and I don't need that for upload to YouTube. 1080 will work just fine. And then once I have the settings all configured here, I'm going to, I've already sent out my link to the podcast, which I'll be doing later today. And as we get into it, I will share with you. Okay, so I've completed a webcast, vidcast, podcast recording. I want to show you a little bit about the back end of Riverside.fm and how it works. So you can see the recording studios, they keep them all here. This is my most recent podcast. Riverside.fm breaks the recording into 3 separate files, one for all participants, which this will show everything that we've done here, split screen view, and then we have the individual recordings that show each individual track. So you have isolated video and audio for editing, which is really handy. And they also offer different editing functionalities for social media right out of Riverside.fm, which is really handy. Works really, really well. Right out of the box, if you go to the all participants video, you can see there's also captions available here, which is really great, especially for uploading to a lot of the platforms. Really, you can download all different types. It does have backups. And what Riverside.fm does is that they record the audio and video real time, and they cache files locally to the machines. When the recording is complete, they upload those cached and they assemble all the files together. So if there's any pieces of data that were lost, whether that's audio or video, they put it together, which means the audio is more reliable and less errors and issues with the audio, and the video is also more quality. That's about it. If you have any questions about how I set up my podcast, vidcast here in my office studio, please leave them below in the comments. And thanks so much for tuning in, and we will talk soon. Thanks.